Well, my next guest was at the announcement and is welcoming the news. Suzanne Zaccour is the Director of Legal Affairs at the National Association of Women and Law. She joins me tonight from Ottawa. Thank you for being here, Suzanne.
Thank you for having me.
Several hundred models and variants added to this list of banned weapons. This is something that you have been calling for. Do you think that the government went far enough?
Well, we're very happy to see movement on that file. We've been advocating on this with partners in the women's rights movement. So, of course, as the government recognized, there are still other steps that are coming. But it's encouraging to hear that some of the models are now going to be banned and that the buyback is underway.
The new gun control measures were announced on the eve of the 35th anniversary of the Montreal massacre. Why do you think it took years to implement the legislation?
Well, I think this is a contentious issue. As we were just hearing, some people feel that it's an attack on law-abiding citizens, which is a problematic reasoning because these are people who bought firearms that were legal, and now that they're going to become illegal, they're going to be compensated with a buyback. So I think the discourse and sometimes the misinformation about the fact that somehow gun owners never participate in domestic violence is part of the reason why it's always so difficult to progress on that file, despite all the work that is put into it.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the criticism, because you mentioned some of it. How do you respond to critics who say that these guns aren't guns that are used in violent crimes and they target law-abiding gun owners?
Well, again, they're not being targeted. They're not being punished in any way. It's simply they're asked to replace a firearm that is becoming illegal with a firearm that's going to be legal, and they're going to be compensated for it. So I think it's really important to understand that, law-abiding citizens should welcome the opportunity to abide by the law, and the law is going to be that these assault weapons are no longer welcome in our streets, in our communities, and it's really important to prioritize safety over cosmetic preference or like an individual's preference of wanting desperately to own these assault weapons. The government with this announcement is prioritizing safety, including women's safety. So this is really something we welcome and we hope to see implemented successfully and very quickly.
Some of those critics also say that, the real issue here is the guns that are coming in from other countries that are illegal. What would you say to that?
So that's just really part of the denial of the role of guns in domestic violence. There are legal guns that are used in domestic violence. There's this narrative by the gun lobby that anyone who has a firearms license and is a legal gun owner, somehow they would be the only part of the entire population where domestic violence is just not occurring, which is of course not true. And legal guns are used to kill women and also to threaten them, to control them. So part of the measures that haven't been as discussed, but that were also part of the announcement, is to say, well, when someone has engaged in domestic violence, they're going to lose their firearms license. So it's important to recognize this link between legal firearms and domestic violence.
You wrote an op-ed in the Hill Times, and you said that gun control is a women's issue. I wonder if you can just expand on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So the use of firearms is actually an extreme risk factor for femicide. So of course there can be domestic violence with or without a firearm, but when there's a gun in the home, the risk to the woman's life is really magnified and increased. So loose gun control leads to again domestic violence perpetrated with firearms. And even in mass shootings, there's often a relationship with domestic violence. Often it's perpetrators who either commit domestic violence or had committed domestic violence in the past, and women are likely to be the victims of this gun violence. And I was saying also in rural areas, particularly where there are a lot more firearms, women also show large support for common sense gun control measures. So that's why we think it's a women's rights issue to for the right of women to be safe in their own homes and communities.
Are you optimistic that there will be change because of this announcement today? And what is the metric that you're using to determine if there is change and when?
Well, when you're in my line of work, you have to be optimistic. Otherwise, you find another job. So we are optimistic, especially the measures on domestic violence. So the way we can believe these are effective is we know from previous femicides, including those that had happened in the last year, that there were warning signs that would now, when the new measures come into force, trigger removal of the gun. So abusers who have a protection order against them, and abusers who have, who are known to have committed domestic violence, the guns will be removed. And of course, many of the mass shootings are committed, including the Polytechnique massacre, with legal at the time assault weapons. So that's what makes us optimistic that these measures can truly be effective in saving lives. The work is not done. This was a very important step announced today, and we'll continue to advocate for these measures to be completed, and hope for that all parties will collaborate and that the government will complete these measures that are life-saving. And in the case of the domestic violence measures, really benefited from input from our group and other women's groups to come with to arrive at measures that we believe will be very effective.
Okay, Suzanne, have to leave it there for now. Appreciate your time on this tonight. That is Suzanne Zaccour, the Director of Legal Affairs at the National Association of Women and the Law. Well, our next guest is a gun rights advocate unhappy with this latest gun control initiative. Tony Bernardo is the spokesperson for the Canadian Shooting Sports Association, and he joins us tonight from Oshawa, Ontario. Tony, thanks for being here. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me.
Let me get your initial reaction to all of this.
Well, a little incredulous, to be honest with you. This is a continuation of a process that they started 4 years ago, and for 4 years there's been 1,500 makes and models of firearms that have been banned, and they haven't confiscated a single one. They're still in the gun safes of law-abiding firearms owners all over Canada. Now they add another 324 makes and models of firearms to the list, and they haven't even been able to collect the first ones. And then they make the deadline date 2 weeks after the next scheduled federal election. It sounds to me like this is some pretty crass politics going on, possibly because the Prime Minister is trying to bolster up his popularity in some of the Montreal ridings and was uninvited to the L'École Polytechnique memorial tomorrow. That's happening, and of course this will probably get him a re-invite.
So you think that this is just politics, this is all for show, but there were some that were at that news conference today, a victim from L'École Polytechnique and others that have been affected, that say this is actually going to make a difference. And I spoke to somebody earlier on the show that says this is going to make substantial change.
Well, that's great, but I don't think it's ever going to actually happen. And somebody can have an opinion that it makes a great change, but let's first take a second and define what a great change is. Since they've done this last ban, these firearms haven't been able to be taken out of a safe except by their owners. And for 4 years, we've had no mass shootings. The shootings we're seeing every night, the real shootings, are happening on the streets of our big cities. And that's where I think most Canadians would agree we need really effective controls there. I don't think that going after RCMP vetted and licensed firearms owners that aren't committing crimes is going to make us any safer.
Let me ask you about something Public Safety Minister Dominic LeBlanc said. He characterized the banned guns as belonging to the battlefield with no reasonable use as hunting weapons. What do you make of that logic?
It's absolute nonsense. It's said by somebody who doesn't know anything about the subject matter. Back 30 odd years ago, they banned all the types of firearms that could ever be used on a battlefield. If these firearms were in the country and able to be banned, Well, they weren't battlefield weapons. And it's just as laughable with this statement that we can send them to the Ukraine. The Ukraine doesn't want them. They want cruise missiles, not Canadian target rifles.
Right. So let's talk about solutions here. Obviously, you don't think that this is the right move by the government. The Conservative leader was very vocal about that today on social media as well. He thinks he's got the same opinion, that this is not about actually public safety. It's more of a display and politics here. What are the solutions? What do you think would make a difference in reducing the number of crimes we see with guns in this country and violence that we see?
Well, let's first of all, let's define what solutions we're looking for. If you're looking to disarm the general populace, then that certainly is one way to go about doing it. You'll disarm everybody except the criminals, because criminals are criminals because they don't obey laws. If we're going to talk about disarming the criminals, let's talk about things that we can do to effectively stop the flow of crime guns coming across the borders.
And so what do you want to be? What would you like to see on that front change?
Well, I'd like to see, first of all, significantly more CBSA people. We need scanners for the containers. We need increased scrutiny of the people that are coming across. We need, quite frankly, there's several holes in the border that this stuff flows across, and without getting into that argument too much, they need to be closed.
Okay, we got to leave it there. Tony, I really appreciate your perspective on this tonight and your expertise. That is Tony Bernardo. He is the spokesperson for Canadian Shooting Sports Association, joining us from Oshawa, Ontario.